For today's webinar, we'll be looking at achieving perfect equipment performance at the lowest cost. Our presenter today is Ross Kennedy. Ross is the president and founder of CTPM. He's recognised as Australasia's leading authority on total productive maintenance and CTPM's operational excellence through the TPM and Lean methodology. So let's begin. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I'll now pass you over to Ross.
Hi everyone, I'm Ross Kennedy and welcome to our webinar today, Achieving Perfect Equipment Performance at the Lowest Cost. We'll be covering 4 points in the webinar today. Why strive for perfect equipment performance, the change of thinking required at a site, the 10 integrated ingredients to achieve perfect equipment performance, and mapping a pathway forward. So, why strive for perfect equipment performance? Just think for a moment what perfect equipment performance could do for your business. For example, more reliable deliveries or better customer satisfaction, more capacity and lower costs or better shareholder satisfaction, less frustrated and safer employees or better employee satisfaction, and less risks or mishap to the environment or better society satisfaction. And what we've found is if you want an improvement initiative to be sustaining, it needs to satisfy all key stakeholders. That's why focusing on perfect equipment performance will generate good buy-in from everyone. Unfortunately, many organisations spend a fortune on maintenance only to achieve mediocre plant and equipment performance. We've been studying this issue for the past 20 years. They've been helping sites cut their maintenance spend by up to 50% while significantly increasing plant performance. So what's the secret? Well, it's all got to do with the change of thinking required at a site. It all starts with the question, who is accountable for reliability of your production plant and equipment? We all know that maintenance departments should be accountable for the service equipment and facilities such as buildings, air compressors, electricity supply, etc. However, it is the production plant and equipment which often generates the most maintenance spend. Too often the answer to our question, who is accountable for the reliability of your production plant and equipment, is the maintenance department, when the correct answer is production. This can be quite a paradigm shift or change of thinking for many sites. However, it is a change of thinking that can have a big impact on the bottom line. If we think about our car, it is the way we drive it, the environment we keep it in, the frequency we get it serviced, and most importantly, the timeliness we respond to any little problems that we may encounter that has the biggest impact on the overall running cost and resale value of our car. Production plant and equipment is no different. The way we operate it, the condition we keep it in, the frequency we allow maintenance to do their servicing, and the way we identify and respond to small problems before they become big problems all contribute significantly to the plant performance and the maintenance costs. So who should be accountable for your production plant and equipment at your site? Unfortunately, we have found many sites interpret this change of thinking by attempting to transfer maintenance tasks to operators using language such as operator-maintainer, so as to reduce maintenance costs when in fact it is about getting the operators to care for their equipment and find any small problems at the earliest possible time to allow maintenance to repair them before they become big expensive problems. CTPM has been researching and applying this new thinking in our Australasian workplace environment for the past 20 years and believe there is still tremendous opportunity for manufacturing, mining and process industries to properly incorporate this new thinking into their continuous improvement activities. The key is to recognise to achieve perfect equipment performance there needs to be a change of thinking for everyone at the site and requires the 10 integrated ingredients to be initiated to in the correct sequence and to the required standard. So what are these 10 integrated ingredients we talk about? Well, we've come up with this model of what we call 10 integrated ingredients. Don't you hate it when the presenter forgets to turn the mobile phone on? Sorry about that. We have our 10 integrated ingredients, and as you can see, they range in a number of focus areas: daily management, OE improvement, structure and rosters, standards and base skills, stable production plan, maintenance capability, work area management, 5S, clean for inspection, train for inspection, and manage for inspection. I thought just to start with, I'd like to go back to our friend Steve Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in his second habit, he said, begin with the end in mind. So if we're talking about perfect equipment performance, what is the end in mind? And on our model, we have number 10, which is manage by inspection. So what do we mean by this manage by inspection? Well, ultimately, it's about continuously monitoring performance and immediately responding to any deviations to standard and always achieving the production plan with 0 accidents, 0 quality problems, and 0 breakdowns. Now, to achieve that, we need operators who can take care of their equipment and identify, for example, equipment defects at the earliest possible time. But other than that, also to understand the functioning of the equipment to identify any problems with the equipment. And thirdly, they need to understand about the relationship between quality and the equipment. If we want to get to 0 quality problems, we need to understand how the different variables in our equipment impact on the product. Now, if you think about perfect quality, obviously we've got to have perfect inputs. We need our raw materials or whatever's coming to us to be perfect to start with. And that's where the concept of 0 defects accepted comes from. So we have, if we get perfect quality coming to us, then it's really our processes, which involves people and equipment, that dictates as to whether we end up with quality output. So we have people we need to develop to identify any issues with the quality of the product, but we also need to have people who can understand equipment, so if something starts going wrong with the equipment, or they understand where the variables in the equipment are, they can pick up on them. So an example of this recently came to mind was our motor car, and I'll go back to motor cars again, and the braking systems on a motor car. Now, most of our cars have disc brakes, disc pads in them, and those pads are wear items. And if the pad wears down to 0 and you start getting metal on metal, your quality of your braking system in your car deteriorates very rapidly. Now, for those who know about the functioning of disc brakes, you get a disc pad that in its new state typically has 10 millimeters of wear pad on it, and progressively that wears down. And the idea is we get that inspected at a regular frequency, like every time we service a car. So as it gets lower and lower, and when it gets down to the 3 or the 2 or the hopefully before 1 millimeter, we go, oh, time to replace the pads. If we don't, we have serious problems. Now, do we go and do that test ourselves? In some cases we get the maintenance or our service people to do that test for us, but we make sure we keep an eye on it and we do get tested and we respond to that deterioration or that wear item in our car. Production plant equipment is exactly the same. It has wear items in it that will deteriorate, and we need to really understand the functioning of the equipment and being sure that that is being monitored so we never get a quality problem. And then finally, obviously this is managing the whole workplace. So if there is a problem, we respond to it immediately, we get to the root cause of it immediately, and that might mean we have to then adjust things like our clean for inspection checks so that we look at our performance, so, well, we had this problem, let's change our claim for inspection checklist as operators, or we get our maintenance colleagues to change their preventive predictive maintenance strategies or checklists and practices so that that problem is always picked up. And it's the operator who needs to take responsibility for it. That's the end game. And if we look at this chart, or this little graphic here, what we've learned is that most process quality problems occur when the plant is not running perfectly or shuts down unexpectedly, equipment fails, or is restarting. So if we don't stop all the breakdowns by picking up on all the equipment defects, etc., we're going to have quality problems. And then the other thing we've found is that accidents occur in the course of responding to problems such as equipment failures. So if we don't stop the breakdowns and the quality problems, we have the accidents. And I was running a webinar last month about TPM and safety, and we asked the question of the audience, has anyone ever had an accidental incident in the workplace because there's been a breakdown on the equipment? And 80% of the attendees said yes to that question. So ultimately the end game is no accidents, because we're not having any quality problems, because we're not having any breakdowns, because our operators are taking ownership and care of the equipment, and they've been trained correctly to be able to do that, along with their maintenance colleagues. So let's look at this model again. If that's the end game, how do we get to the end game? Well, what we've identified is there are foundations. Daily management. In other words, if we don't have good daily management practices, good effective daily review meetings and addressing issues and actioning them so they don't come back and bite us again, people are going to be too busy running around to do improvement activities that will lead us to perfect equipment performance. Again, if we don't have time for, if we don't initially improve our OEE to free up time so we can then train our operators. And again, if we don't have structure and rosters correct, we will not have the ownership and the relationships required to do the improvements. Our capabilities about having operators who can really operate the equipment, proper standards and base skills, having a stable production plan so we can have regular clean for inspections, having maintenance capability that can respond rapidly to small things and support our operators, and having the work area management, or 5S, in place that promotes discipline and orderliness, so we have the confidence we can train our operators to take care of the equipment. So they're the capability, and finally we have impact, and that's this clean for inspections, trained for inspections, and managed by inspection. And if we don't have the foundations and capability right, the impact just won't occur, or won't be sustaining, or just fall away. Now, if we divide this model up into two halves, what we've found is the first half tend to be addressed using cross-functional teams, whereas the second half tend to be addressed using area-based teams. And for work area management and clean for inspection, train for inspection, manage for inspection, it's all about production area-based teams. And obviously point 6 is getting our maintenance people together. So just a little bit more on these foundations for you. Daily management. As I mentioned earlier, if we don't have measuring the right things, having effective daily review meetings where we monitor our expectations, did we achieve our expectations for the day? If not, what are we doing about it? Having good information centers so we can see what's going on immediately, so where the problems are, red, green, figures, etc., trend charts, action lists, and most importantly, if we need to initiate root cause analysis, having that very clearly displayed and actioned and timely. So getting good daily management practices is very important. Second one, OEE improvement. If we need to improve capacity to allow time for people development. So we need to get the OEE up initially so that we can then allocate a set time, which is typically about 5% per shift per week, to do their regular clean for inspections, etc. The structure and rosters, as I mentioned earlier, we need to create ownership, so having proper area-based teams of 4 to 7 people plus a frontline leader who's there to develop the team, the crew, and we need the relationships with our maintenance people and the operators. And we're not going to get very far if our maintenance people on totally separate rosters to our production people. We can't get them to work and build the relationships up so the maintenance people feel comfortable sharing their learning with the operators, so the operators can learn about caring for the equipment. So very important we get those things in place. Then our capability, our standards and base skills. Enhance operational practices and standards across all shifts. It's amazing how we find in a lot of organisations that the operators tend to be operating the equipment, and I call it by magic. They press all the buttons and they do what they're told, and that's about it. If we think about the purpose of operations is to make a perfect quality output, the key things we need to understand is, do the operators really understand what's coming to them is correct, the way they do their work is correct, and what they're passing on is correct. And just by going out and asking the operators 3 basic questions around those issues, you'll soon find whether they have good standard practices in what they're doing. So this often entails looking at what should be the settings on the equipment, so we call that center lining. When we do that, often we find weaknesses in the equipment that are stopping it from being able to run at the proper center lines settings, so that you may have to do some corrective work on the equipment. And then secondly, getting standard operating procedures that explains why things should be done the way they should be done. Too often we get standard operating procedures that just list out all the tasks that need to be done. There's no explanation as to why each task is so important. And if we don't explain the why, people won't follow them. Been our learning. So that's a very important one. Stable production plan. We don't want to stabilise, well, it'd be lovely to stabilise the whole plan for the full week. Often that's quite impractical. What we do find is we look at the full range of products we have going through our area, or the equipment we're working on. What they've found is probably about 6% of the products, or few of them, probably make up a high volume. And you can probably, with roughly about 6% of the products, make up about 2 days of production. So if you can stabilise the most dominant products for say just 2 days, and during that 2-day period have your regular clean for inspections at a set time all the time, you'll be able to do your regular clean for inspections, and maintenance people will be able to support that, and you'll make progress. If you've got a production plan that's all over the place, it's just all going to fall away. Maintenance capability. We need to make time for maintenance to come and work with the operators and fix up the defects in a timely way. So we need to look at where they're losing their time at the moment, and we've found most maintenance people, we go and survey them and look at whether they're having trouble finding equipment, finding technical information, being told wrong information when called to a job, etc., etc. There's a list of things that we have. In a typical workplace, we find maintenance can be losing up to about 35% of their time each week. So if we can address some of those issues, get them on board and free up their time, they're able to go and address the issues raised by the operators. We then need to introduce a defect management system to work alongside the work order management system, so that the defects get the right priority. And then ultimately the maintenance people need to develop excellent preventive predictive strategies for the equipment based on the new condition the equipment's going to be in by the clean for inspections and the work that the operators are doing. And finally, work area management, or 5S as some people, most people call it. We call it work area management because we try to keep away from Japanese language, but it's about getting the discipline and orderliness and the communication between the shifts to promote the sharing of learning. So it's not just making the place look neat and tidy, it's using it to develop discipline and orderliness and communications between shifts. And that's very, very important. If you don't get that right, there's no point getting into the impact areas of clean for inspection, etc. So our clean for inspection is to train the operators and change the equipment using visual controls, etc. putting perspex in place so you can see things at the as you walk past where the defects are, match marking nuts and bolts, for example, so you can see them coming undone. So we want operators to be able to identify equipment defects at the earliest possible time. It was interesting, a few weeks back I ran a workshop in Sydney for a company and had representatives from a number of their sites to learn about clean, well, one of the topics was clean for inspection and getting out there and looking after the plant and equipment, and we took them into a plant because we're actually doing the workshop at one of their sites and stood them in front of their operating plant and had 3 areas we had them stand and stood them there for 5 minutes and said, now list out all the defects for us please on the equipment. Then brought them back to the room and got everyone to share their lists. And we supported that by taking some photos of the actual defects we knew were out there. The interesting thing was that the majority of the people identified all the safety issues. There wasn't very many, but there was a few out there, and they identified those, which was excellent, and they identified housekeeping issues where people hadn't put things back and weren't orderly. Very few defects were identified, and we even showed them a photograph of one gauge on a piece of equipment where the dial had actually fallen off the gauge. Pretty obvious defect from our perspective. Very few people picked up on it, because most of our people are trained to look for safety issues and look for housekeeping issues, not defects. So we need to get regular weekly clean for inspections if we're going to train people about finding equipment defects. After we've done that, and the cleaning for inspection gets people to find defects, stop contamination so it's easy to clean the equipment to find the defects and get lubrication, etc. right, we move into train for inspection, which is teaching the operators about the functioning of the equipment so they can understand problems with the equipment. Things like how the pneumatics work, how all the nuts and bolts work, how all the, if you've got hydraulics, how the hydraulics work, how the transmissions work, etc. So there's a fair bit of training involved, but it really gets the operators to understand the functioning. Like I explained about the car issue and the brakes, understanding how the disc brakes work and what wears in them and why and how they, what the problems can occur with them. And finally, managed by inspection, which we've spoken about. Developing operators to manage their workplace to achieve perfect equipment performance with no safety, quality and equipment problems or issues. And the interesting thing is when we look at this model and we start talking about the time frame for it, what we find is just to do the last 3 parts of it, or ingredients, the clean for inspection, train for inspection and manage for inspection, that in itself can take sometimes up to about 3 years, because to train people up to learn all new skill sets does take time. So we see that this whole model can take 3 or 4 years to do. Now, the other thing about this model is when we start thinking about closing the gap on OEE performance. Now, obviously, perfect equipment performance means you're running at best practice OEE for your equipment. Now, every piece of equipment will have a best practice OEE based on its requirements. In other words, from planned downtime perspective, do we stop for lunch? Do we have safety meetings? Do we have toolbox meetings at the start of the shift? What planned downtime do we have to suit our requirements at the site? Setup times. How many setups do we do based on our product mix? All those will impact on what your target for best practice OEE is. So we go out and we have a look at our current performance, and let's say our current performance is 60%, and the best practice we work out with all our setups, etc., is 80%. So we have a gap from 60 to 80. What we've found is by getting the foundations right, we'll probably close that gap by 25%, or we'll go from 60 to 65. If we get the capability right, we'll probably close the gap by another 25%. So that will probably take us up to 70%. what we've found is the impact, the last bit, getting this last bit going, keeping in mind all the other things are going to be working in concert with them, will close that gap. And it's probably that last impact, which is very much area-based teams, will give you a 50% extra gain. So how do we go forward? We've updated and enhanced our checklist for getting improvement going. We call it now the summary checklist for achieving perfect equipment performance. And on the left-hand side we have issues, and in the middle is what happens if you don't address the issues, and on the right-hand side now are those 10 ingredients. So if we just look at that little bit that I've highlighted in red, so you can read it. First point is ineffective site, department or area daily management processes. If we have ineffective daily review meetings, information centres, and we have poor problem solving capability, well, we really need to get into one, which is daily management. If we have barriers or poor relationship between production and maintenance, or we have barriers and poor relationship between support staff, or inaccurate reporting of production equipment performance and have a lot of losses, etc. Poor understanding of where the equipment losses are related to technical issues or people development or management issues, OE improvements required. So it gives you a bit of a guideline, a bit of a map as to where you should start. We're not saying you've got to start at 1 and go 1 to 10, but you've got to understand where your weaknesses are and make sure you do get the foundations and you do get the capability right before you dive into the impact areas of clean for inspection, etc. Otherwise it's just going to fall over, and we've certainly seen that happen at sites, unfortunately. So just to finish up, thank you very much for listening in. Just how can we help you? We are putting together hopefully a lot of support material to support this model. For example, daily management. We've got rating sheets, so you can rate where you are to best practice on daily management. Very simple sheet. We have booklets now that we're trying to articulate what are the key aspects of effective daily management, and we've identified 6 in our booklet there of about 16 pages. We have team member manuals and workbooks if you want to put a team together to go and set up an effective daily review meeting, for example, or teach people frontline problem solving, etc. We've also putting together some videos that you can go and show to your CEO or GM. They're like 3 or 4 minute videos about, for example, perfect equipment performance, how to achieve perfect equipment performance, and just to get the change of thinking required at the top of the business. We're also going to introduce a new one-day workshop called Learning the Secrets of Perfect Equipment Performance. Now, again, we can run this in-house, or we'll also be running our first one in Sydney, and if it's successful, we will take it to probably Melbourne and Brisbane if there is interest for it. So that's something new, and anyone here in New South Wales, it's down on the 18th of October. You might have some people at your site who want to go and attend that workshop. And as Chris mentioned, we have our membership, and the whole idea of our membership is to share the learnings between members, so you can go and talk to other members and visit other members. So we certainly encourage you, if you're not already a member, to become a member of the CI community. And we have our LinkedIn and YouTubes, and we do have a lot of previous webinars, and I was at a site, or sorry, I was at 3 sites last week, came up with the issue of standard operating procedures, and I said, well, we've got a webinar on that, and it takes you through using the learning from training with the industry and the importance of setting up standard operating procedures that actually explain why, and templates, etc. And they go, oh wow, and you know, so they're there as a resource to help you depending on what your issue is. Right, well, with that, again, thank you very much for listening. Hope our new model is of interest. We've certainly put a lot of thought into it, and we're hopefully developing it further and further with more support material. But yeah, if we can be of any help, please do not hesitate. And we'll open up for any questions that you may have.
Thanks very much, Ross. As Ross mentioned, we'll have question time now. I'm just taking a look through to see if we have any questions or any hands raised. And it looks like we have one question here for you, Ross. It says, you mentioned the operator equipment management or impact part of the 10 integrated ingredients takes 3 years. Why so long?
Good question. What we've found is that in a lot of cases, a lot of the operators aren't mechanically minded, and this whole concept of equipment is a whole new skill set. Now, we do get some operators who are very mechanically minded and they jump into this very quickly and they go very well, but there's a lot that we come across who aren't. And therefore, we've got to really take them on a pathway of learning. And the best analogy we've found is learning to play a musical instrument. When someone first decides to take up a musical instrument, often they are very lousy at it, or it sounds horrible. But what we've found is the most effective way for someone to learn a whole new skill set, like playing a musical instrument, is a half-hour lesson every week with time to practice and encouragement. And with the expectation over 2 or 3 years, you'll actually learn a whole new skill set and you'll start to play the musical instrument. It may take longer to become a master at it, but you start to get quite good after about 2 or 3 years. It doesn't happen after the first 1 or 2 lessons. So learning about equipment and learning how to care for equipment and how equipment functions and how to manage your workplace properly as an independent sort of totally responsible team takes time. So we find half-hour lesson every week type thinking, and it's certainly well proven. Mankind's been playing musical instruments for a long time, and it's still the proven way of doing it. It's the best and most effective way to do it in the workplace.
Thanks very much, Ross. We have one more question here. David's asking, can you expand on maintenance capability, managing the balance between performing planned and scheduled work and responding quickly to defects?
Okay, can you just say that one again for me? So
David's asking, can you expand on maintenance capability, managing the balance between performing planned and scheduled work and responding quickly to defects?
Right, okay, no, very, very good question. What we've found is that in traditional maintenance you have a work order system, and the work order system is based on priorities of the work. So what typically happens, if people say, right, we've identified defects, we need to put the defect into the work order system, yes, it goes into the work order system, but when they prioritize it, because it's a defect, something's a bit loose, something's not bent, something's not correct, it'll often get low priority, and therefore it doesn't get addressed very well. What we've found is the most effective way is to have a separate defect management system where you collect the defects and have a defect list. Then in your preventive predictive maintenance work order system, you would put in a allocated time, for example, the time during a clean for inspection, which is at a standard time every week, for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and allocate that the maintenance person would go and fix defects up. And then the operators would, with the maintenance people, decide which defects would get the highest priority, and they would spend their hour and a half fixing up the defects. That way you keep them out of the work order system, it doesn't clog up the work order system, and you always know you're going to get your defects prioritised and worked on each week. So that's why we say we need a dual system. And you find when you go down this path of, when people talk about lean, you need a dual system for planning and scheduling to get a stable production plan, and you need dual system for maintenance, and that's all this change of thinking. So hopefully I explained it a bit, but that's really what we need to distinguish the two, and we need to give a priority to the defects at the set time during the clean for inspection.
Great, thank you very much. Looks like we have no more questions today, so that will end today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Just a quick reminder to visit our current events page on the CTPM website for events happening in capital cities this year. Please feel free to contact us at any time if you have any further questions, require information, or would just like to have a chat. Our next webinar will be held on the 11th of October, and we hope to see you again. On behalf of everyone at CTPM, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, wishing you all the very best, and we'll see you next time.